vlug ik naar die kant van die Oppingtonse zand, daaronder bij de grote rivier. O, breng mij terug naar die oude Transvaal, daar waar mijn Sarre woont. Daaronder in die middels bij die groendoornboom, daar woont mijn Sarre.
Hi folks, Jerry Carter, reporting in for duty. I've been out on the veldt. Left on Thursday, it's Saturday afternoon, just got back. Material for the channel, went down to Geelong. So I've got 2 Boer War stories down there and also got a true crime story. So 3 episodes, but they're a bit down the track. We've got a lot of catching up to do on the channel because I've got some material. We haven't been to Borough yet. We haven't seen what I got of the Breaker Morant film. That's because we're still working our way through the times and crimes of the Carbineers. Of course, when I travel, I need a book. I need some light reading, and my go-to is The War with Johnny Boer. It's a big, thick book. You know, I'm most of the way through it, I suppose. 4/5, I'm going to say. I've been going like a couple of years reading it, but I only read 2 or 3 pages at a time. They're letters, it's not a narrative. They're fascinating, but they're letters and accounts of Australians in the Boer War. So what's of interest to me, and to you, if you're vaguely interested, is the last couple of pages I read deal with Pietersburg. I didn't realise this, but Pietersburg was the last town held by the Boers in the Boer War. After the government of the Zuid-Afrikaanse Republic fled, and we know Kruger went over to Europe and they dispersed, they kept establishing towns as their new headquarters. And Pietersburg was the last town where the South African Republic had its seat of government till the British took it. General Bayers, we've heard a little bit about him, and also Field Cornet Viljoen. They're the last 2 sort of in that top eastern region of the Transvaal that are still causing trouble and still free to roam. There's a few other Boer leaders that they haven't been able to catch. De Wet, and he's a slippery eel, but mostly they've brought them to heel. But what's of interest, the account that I just read, was when they got to Pietersburg, I think they were Tasmanians, there was some Imperial Bushmen, and it says in this account that they linked up with the Bushveldt Carbineers to clear Pietersburg of. They expected the Boers to put up a real resistance. They expected something like 10,000 Boers to really fight for Pietersburg, but of course they got nothing like that. But of interest is this account, which collaborates what Witten says in one of his stories in Scapegoats of the Empire. So this is from the chapter, The Occupation of Pietersburg, the last Boer capital, the 8th of April 1901, Northern Transvaal. So it says that the Zoutpansberg district in the Northern Transvaal was, in early 1901, still controlled by the Boers. Its major town was Pietersburg, 180 miles from Pretoria along the Northern Railway line. Lord Kitchener ordered Plumer to subdue this area and then work in conjunction with the other columns to snare those commandos led by Bayers and Viljoen, which operated so effectively in the northeast. It was expected that there would be strong Boer resistance. So Plumer's column consisted of some 1,200 Australians and New Zealanders, was joined at Warm Baths by the newly formed Bushveldt Carbineers, in which many Australians were serving. Plumer's troops left Warm Baths for Pietersburg on the 2nd of April 1901, together with the 18th Battery RFA, They entered Nilstrom on the 3rd of April and Potgieter's Rust on the 5th. Now, just a side mention here: if when we see the town of Warm Baths, that's where I met Johan when I went on that tour. He showed me where the Tasmanians won their VCs. I think 2 VCs were awarded to the Tasmanians in an action at Warbaths. So there is an episode, if you're interested. It's called The Terror of the Tasmanians, where they were bushwhacked by some Boers. Anyway, back to the book. So in a letter from Pietersburg dated the 9th of April 1901, Captain R.C. Cox of the South Australian Imperial Bushmen described the occasion of entering the town and an incident where a Boer sharpshooter killed 3 men. Now, this is the same incident that we're going to hear from in a moment from George Whitton. So, quote, here's the letter. At last we are here, being the first British troops to enter and take possession of this town, also the railway from Warmbaths. So now all the railway lines in South Africa are ours. Everybody had predicted a big defence by the Boers, that they were about 10,000 strong, had the place and surroundings thoroughly fortified and entrenched. But to our utter amazement, especially our own little South Australian troop, we being the advanced scouts, we quietly marched into and through the town without the slightest opposition, excepting that 2 miles out, 2 of our men on the right flank got captured by a body of Boer scouts, who after taking their horses and ammunition let them go. As we got through the town, we fired on several who quickly rode away, but as we halted in extended line, the Tasmanians, under the charge of Lieutenants Sale and Walter, whilst firing on the retreaters, got shot mortally. Walter dying a few minutes later and Sale in a very critical condition. A Western Australian who was trying to find the sniper in the grass was shot dead, and then the whereabouts of the fellow was made out, and speedily the cold-blooded murderer was finished off with a bullet and bayonet. When the first shot hit him, he threw up his hands and cried for mercy. After Lieutenant Walter's life had ebbed out, Lieutenant Sale called on the man to surrender. Unfortunately, his reply was a bullet for the officer. The man was supposed to be one of Commandant Bayer's guards and was the last on foot to leave the town, but got only a few hundred yards when he was down in the long grass for safety, and was actually alongside the Tasmanians. As they fired, he fired at them with one of our own rifles. A few prisoners were taken in the town. So in the book, in the account by the Australian, there was a couple of Australians shot by a Boer sniper. According to Whitton, he was a Afrikaner school teacher. So what happened was he was laying in the grass. He opened fire on these Tasmanians. He wounded one. Tasmanian ran up to help his comrade, and he shot him as well. I think he shot 3 Australians. And then as they rushed him, he threw down his gun. He held up his hands and said, "I surrender." And one of the soldiers has walked up and dug and stuck his bayonet into him, and another one shot him at the same time. So that was Whitton's attempt to say, well, nothing happened to us about that. You know, shooting of Boer prisoners was an accepted practice. I suppose it's a bit different when you've just been fired on, but as we've heard in the last few episodes, those Boers that were coming in were fever-ridden, and they were kids, and they weren't even armed, so it doesn't really, it's oranges and apples, isn't it? So, yeah, last time we heard about a really successful mission of Morant. Actually, he performed admirably. Within a fortnight, he'd gone out on these unexplored bush tracks. He'd found Cornet Kelly's lager. He'd surprised him at dawn. There were no shots fired. They captured them intact, the men, the women, and the children. They weren't a commando. They didn't have any artillery. And they marched them back to Fort Edward. And it seems that quick thinking by the women may have saved the men. When the men were ordered to march further back from the lager, the women put their heads down and said, no, we walk with our men. And Whitten went up and whispered, you've saved your men. Is that true? Well, you'd have to say with history, they were in real danger, those men. But anyway, that's not the way Morant rolled on this occasion. He brought them back as he was ordered to do. He filed a report. It was a highly successful mission, and then he's taken leave to go down to Pretoria to do Captain Hunt's fulfill his will, or I think there was a pony involved, or there's some belongings of Captain Hunt down in Pretoria that Morant wants to sort out the business for his departed friend. So today's episode, the officers are arrested. We've got a deposition put in by about, I can't remember the number, there was about 15 troopers, most of them mere troopers, but I think there's one corporal. They're real pissed off, they're real disgruntled, and they're openly rebelling or upset with their commanding officers. But what seems to set it off is not so much the actions of shooting Boers, but more that the officers aren't looking after their men. There's no soap, there's no provisions. They're accusing the officers of drinking and being drunk and forgetting about their duties to look after the hard-working grunts, the troopers back at Fort Edward. That seems to be what lights the fire. And little known to Hancock and Morant and the others, Hannam and even Major Lenihan, is the increasing attention they're drawing to themselves in Pietersburg. Their actions have been under the magnifying glass for some time now, and they haven't gone unnoticed. They're going to face the music. So we're going to hear that they set out to ride down to Pietersburg. They're not sure really why they're riding down there, but before they even get to Pietersburg, they're met by a group of officers and men, and they're arrested and put into a fort for holding without realising the levity, seriousness of the charges that are going to be laid against them. Alright, well, this is a shorter episode. Next time, I think it'll be the last episode. We'll wind it up next episode with the actual court case, the court-martial and the execution. But this time we're just going to talk about the deposition, the accusations against them, and their arrest. Alright? So we're into October 1901. The officers of the Bushveldt Carbineers and Captain Taylor are arrested. Last time we heard about the capture of Tom Kelly, and the Boers, and their return to the Spelonken was underway. The attitude of the troopers towards their officers couldn't be suppressed. So while Morant and the others were out capturing Kelly, the mood had turned very sombre and aggressive back at Fort Edward. This is what, and it was blatant, their aggression. This is what Trooper McInnes says. He'd remained behind at Fort Edward, and he complained on the 20th of September that they had not had any soap or a change of clothing for a fortnight. Although a convoy of fresh clothes and provisions had arrived from Pietersburg, he blamed the only officer here who, he said, is too thick-headed to do anything for us. McInnes maintained, if some of these dunder-headed creatures wearing stars found their proper level, the majority would be earning their living with a pick and shovel. Brainless idiots whose only thoughts are for the liquor that they will swill like the pigs that they are. So that's pretty blatant, the feeling in the fort, isn't it? All the officers and non-commissioned officers of Morant's detachment were recalled to Pietersburg on the 21st of October 1901, whereas Captain Taylor had been recalled to headquarters 3 weeks earlier after his return from the Portuguese border. Remember, he was over there looking for those gold panners. This was about the same time that Lieutenant Morant was granted leave to go to Pretoria to attend to the affairs of his late friend, Captain Percy. So their last night of freedom. Obeying orders, the detachment arrived at Fort Klipdan, about 30 kilometres north of Pietersburg, also known as Fort Dahl. I've got a picture of it for you. And they got there on the evening of Tuesday, the 22nd of October. The next morning, when they were only a few kilometres from the town, they were surprised to be met by 2 officers and a large patrol who escorted them to headquarters in Pietersburg. Morant, who was obviously not with them, was arrested a few days later when he returned from leave. Doesn't say who was in that detachment that was escorted to Pietersburg. Here's our friend Trooper Silk. He describes how the detachment was escorted. When 5 miles from the town, he must mean Pietersburg, an officer of the Lancashire Infantry rode up to Hancock and arrested him, and then did the same for Whitten, while a sergeant from the Mounted Infantry arrested Sergeant Major Hammett, and an escort of 80 Mounted Infantry surrounded all the party and brought them to town like criminals. Picton was out at Cluny's Poort at this time, and Hannum was at Rita's. When they arrived in Petersburg, they were both arrested and put in the clink too. So ultimately, all the Spelunken officers, including Captain Taylor, who'd been recalled, and Morant when he returned from leave in Pretoria, were arrested. So this is what Lieutenant Whitten describes as his experience. Following morning, we made an eventful entry into the garrison. I was riding ahead with the advance guard, and when about 3 miles from town, I was met by 2 mounted officers who inquired if I was Lieutenant Whitten. Upon replying in the affirmative, they informed me that the garrison commandant wished to see me. One of the officers accompanied me into Pietersburg and took me directly to the commandant's office, where I met Major Nearson, staff officer to Colonel Hall, who merely asked me if I was Lieutenant Whitten. Upon replying in the affirmative, he gave the officer who accompanied me some instructions. Leaving the commandant's office, I was required to accompany him to the garrison artillery fort. The proceedings seemed rather strange to me, as I had not the slightest conception of what was about to take place. On my arrival at the fort, I was left with Lieutenant Beatty, who could not or would not enlighten me. A little later, Major Nearson came to me and informed me that I was under close arrest pending a court of inquiry. The officer commanding the fort then informed me I was a military prisoner under his charge. If I attempted to escape or went outside the wire entanglements, I would be shot. That I was not to communicate with anyone outside, and all correspondence was to be sent through him. At this time, I had not the faintest notion of the charges against me, or for what reason I was made a prisoner. They had no idea, why any of this was happening. Once again, I'm reminded of what we heard a little while ago, that if they hadn't killed the Reverend, they hadn't killed Heath, probably they would never have been arrested. So other officers were also arrested. Major Lenihan, Captain Taylor, Lieutenant Hancock, Picton, Hannum, Sergeant Major Hammett, all were in the same predicament as Whitten, had been confined separately to various parts of the garrison. Only a fortnight later were the officers informed of the nature of the charges that would be laid against them. Whitten voiced profound surprise and amazement at these charges, and thereby probably expressed the sentiments that all of them were experiencing. Without the prisoners, which was what the officers were, being aware, their actions over the past few months have been closely scrutinised by military personnel in Pietersburg. So this is a letter from Davy's book, Morant and the Bushveldt Carbineers. We've heard about this book in another episode. It's addressed to, it's a letter addressed to Colonel Hall and signed by no less than 15 men from Fort Edward, and had been dispatched to headquarters in Pietersburg. So this is like a deposition of the troopers. I'll read what we got here. Robert Mitchell Cochrane, he's a Justice of the Peace for Western Australia, drawn up and witnessed this document of protest. It's addressed to Colonel Hall, the officer in command, Line of Communications, Pietersburg. It says, quote, "We, the undersigned non-commissioned officers and men of the Bushveldt Carbineers, recently returned from the Spelonkin district, feel it is our imperative duty to ask you to kindly hold an exhaustive and impartial inquiry into the following disgraceful incidents which have occurred in the Spelonkin district, in order the exact truth may be elicited and the blame attributed to those responsible. These disgraceful incidents are: 1. July the 2nd, the shooting of 6 surrendered Boers prisoners who'd been entirely disarmed and offered no resistance. 2. July the 4th, the shooting of Trooper Van Buren by Lieutenant Hancock for reasons which will be detailed later on. 3. August the 11th, the shooting of a surrendered and wounded Boer prisoner Visser. 4. August the 23rd, shooting 8 surrendered Boer prisoners and 1 German missionary. 5. September the 5th, Lieutenant Hannum and a party fired on wagons containing women and children, although no resistance whatsoever was offered in spite of remonstrations of the men, killing 2 children of tender years and wounding 1 little girl. And 6. On the September the 7th, shooting 2 men and a boy who were coming in to surrender, this fact being well known. So the rest of the deposition has the incidents which are in detail, but we've heard about those, so I'm not going to read them out again to you. You know them all if you've watched the episodes. For this and other reasons, we believe Major Lenihan to be privy to these misdemeanours. It is for this reason we have taken the liberty of addressing this communication direct to you. Sundry civilian witnesses can give you evidence of importance, provided they are guaranteed protection, for a veritable reign of terror has prevailed in this district. Their names are Mr. Bristow, farmer, the doctor at the Spelonkin Hospital, Mr. Hayes, storekeeper Mrs. Cooksley, Mr. Pentring, farmer Mr. Van Saker at Fonseca, he's a farmer and storekeeper, Mr. Pritchard's a storekeeper, and others. Among the Bushveldt Carbineers are plenty of troopers in the Spelonkin district who, if brought in, would gladly give evidence. So it says, "Sir, many of us are Australians who have fought throughout nearly the whole war, while others are Afrikaners who have fought from Colenso till now. We cannot return home with the stigma of these crimes attached to our names. Therefore, we humbly pray that a full and exhaustive inquiry may be made by Imperial officers in order that the truth be elicited and justice done. Also, we beg that all witnesses may be kept in camp in Pietersburg until the inquiry is finished. So deeply do we deplore the opprobrium which must be inseparably connected with these crimes, as scarcely a man, once his time is up, can be prevailed to re-enlist in this corps. Trusting for the credit of thinking you will grant the inquiry we seek." And it's got their names and their ranks. "We are, sir, your obedient servants." So we've got Ernest Brown, Corporal, Skelton Trooper, Thompson Trooper, Hatfield Trooper, Sheridan Trooper, Penn Trooper, Duckett Trooper, Christie Trooper, Stratton Trooper, Lucas Trooper, Hampton Trooper, Cox Trooper, Van der Westhuizen Trooper, McCormick Trooper, Silk Trooper. And it finishes, it says, "The signatures of many other men now absent on patrol, can also be obtained. Witnesses to all the above signatures. Signed R.M. Cochrane, Justice of the Peace, W. Australia, Western Australia, the 4th of October 1901. So the document exposes the level that criminality had sunk to at Fort Edward. The document has been written and signed by Australians as well as other members of the Bushveldt Carbineers. It's been suggested that this might have had a bearing on the epitaph that was engraved on the headstone of Morant and Hancock, intimating that they'd been betrayed by those of your own household. So, yeah, that's on Morant's headstone and Hancock's. That quote from the Bible about being betrayed by your own. So that's the charges. So they've been, sent to Major Hall. Lenihan, Major Lenihan, has been included like he knew all along. Anyway, excluding the inquiries made by the Berlin Mission Society, no letters of complaints were known to have been written before the end of the war to the British military by any of the relatives of the victims. Likewise, no letters recommending prosecution of the perpetrators were known to have been written by the Zoutpansberg Commando. Okay, so Charles in his book is saying there were other things that he hasn't investigated because they tend to look like minor crimes compared to the main issues which the troopers have listed in their deposition. Certain relatives and dependents applied for compensation from the British military authorities, and these applications were dealt with by Major Bolton and civilian staff at the magistrate's office in Pietersburg after the war. Already early in the trial, some witnesses rapidly turned King's evidence. One such was ex-Captain Robertson, who was then dispatched to Durban to round up other witnesses. Even some time-expired soldiers were traced and brought back to Pietersburg to give evidence at the trial. And even more stories of intimidation and threats by the arrested officers against the men of the unit were exposed. You can only surmise the state of mind of those remaining officers and troopers back at Fort Edward. Perhaps the 15 men who had signed the last and most incriminating of all the depositions felt particularly uneasy about the rest of their officers. They were very well aware of the closeness to their own persons of some of these threats and atrocities, such as the mysterious death of Trooper Van Buren, who, though only a Dutchman, was still one of their own men. Cochrane's memorandum also referred to actions that were deliberately planned to eliminate inconvenient witnesses, such as attempt on the lives of Sergeant Wrench and Rogers and Troopers Lucas and Dale. None of the officers or troopers back at Fort Edward had any idea at this stage whether any of the accused would perhaps be found not guilty and come back to Fort Edward. Captain Taylor had been arrested a short while before the other officers and was present during the trial, but no reference has been found to his actual incarceration at the Pietersburg military barracks, and it's possible that he was held elsewhere. Witness comments regarding events and even the writing of poetry by Morant at the barracks during the trial include mainly references to his fellow Carbineer officers. He barely makes any mention of Captain Taylor, who certainly maintained an exceptionally low profile as a prisoner. So we've now entered a waiting game as the prosecution will be getting their witnesses together and all the paperwork. And as Charles says, that it's interesting that none of the families of the men that were murdered had made any complaints to Pietersburg. It was only the troopers and the junior officers that were angry and disgruntled with a particular number of officers, but not all of them, because as far as I know, Major Lenihan was got off scot-free. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. So that's the state of things as it is. In the next episode, we're going to be hearing about the court of inquiry and then the court-martial. Now, I am going to include the charges, each of the 6 charges that were put into the deposition for you to read. If you're so inclined, you can pause and you can read the details of the charges. But we have heard about them, but you might want to read how they were worded in the complaint which was lodged with Colonel Hall in Pietersburg.
Breng mij terug naar jouw Transvaal, daar waar mijn Sarajevo.